screen. And we have two films. The first one that we'll be seeing in a moment is called Bidesia, and it's by Surabhi Sharma. We have the pleasure of having her here with us, and she'll be talking later about her film. Bidesia in Mumbai, I've seen it in Oxford when Surabhi Sharma came to visit. It's Bidesia is Bhojpuri for the one who leaves home, and as you may know, 1 in 4 migrants in Mumbai is Bhojpuri, people from the North Indian states of Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. So this film is sort of about everybody moving into the urban space and the crowdedness of the urban space with the economic migrants being there and the culture that they create, how they interact with their city, that their adopted city. And the second film is a film from a couple of Chinese directors, one who's an artist, one who is a poet, and doing a cooperation with an academic at Cornell, which is an experimental documentary that shows sort of the empty spaces that are left behind. So I hope you'll be able to come to both screenings. So can you put the next slide, and I'll just show you the, yeah, so that is the second film. It's called YUMEN, and that will be after the tea break. Okay, so that's it, and we can start the film now. The first film is Bidesia. I guess the obvious question is about how this comparison works versus, you know, your film versus this film YUMEN by Ruotao and Sniadecki and Huang. They're very different, obviously, and we can talk about that. But you know, this morning we were talking about the comparisons being odious and the unique qualities in each thing, comparative mode being about the structure of the difference. And so, one way of looking at comparison, I think, is as a translational process. That effectively you're deciding on certain terms that you're willing to accept, and also that one language, as it were, when it's going over into another, is always obviously limited, and that has to do with the structure of the difference. So if you take JP and Huang Xiang's and Ruotao's film and you judge it in terms of your film, that would be a certain set of circumstances, and if you judge your film in the terms of their film, that would be a different set of circumstances, and you know, there are kinds of gaps there that we have to be aware of. So I guess, like I said at the beginning, for me, the way that this comparison works is about this route between home and the villages and towns and as it were, the cities that are left behind when people move out for economic migration purposes. The city, in case it wasn't apparent that YUMEN had been, was an oil city, and it just dried up in the main, and so led to this exodus of people. And so that's how that emptiness came about. And the directors have referred to it as almost a ruin porn, and I'd have to say that it does have that element, although I think probably it's got the ruin porn not only of buildings but of people. So the ruined people, the porn of them. So I guess I just want to open up with those ideas and pass the mic around to find out what your impressions are, and then see if we've got some questions. So does anybody want to speak first?
Well, actually, for me, the pairing was most interesting because I don't think the question is of comparing the two films on different terms, but I think you know, a lot of the ideas that I was trying to play out in a space of excess, which it was in my film, excess of sound, of movement, of life, of ideas, and so on and so forth. I think here I found a connect in some of the ideas I was playing out of how do you within that alienate the audience to think through a space. And here a lot of the sound design was really thinking that through, so that it's not just about you know, ruin porn. It was really mediating one's connect with that space, with the very sophisticated and very interesting use of sound, of you know, throwing perspective totally out of gear. So you have that shift of perspective and sound, which is totally in opposition to what was happening on the image, was, as an audience, pulling you out of that space really to allow for a whole other set of ideas to come through. And in an odd sort of a way, when I was working on my film, I was constantly trying to do that with a very different idea in my head. But so for me, actually, in formal terms, I was very excited to see this film, because of course this one is sharper and clearer with everything that it's doing. Mine gets, the space is so muddled that whatever I'm trying to do would also possibly come across as muddled. But for me as a filmmaker, it was very nice to see certain ideas that I'm messing around with actually play out with complete clarity here. And the whole theme, the preoccupation with this theme of what does it mean to enter these ghost towns? So mine is a ghost town that's alive with people, but it is not city, it is not village, it is not empty, it is not you know, fully populated. It's a strange zone, and here it becomes a very different kind of space we are entering. This is, of course, you know, totally an abandoned space, but the spaces that I was filming in Bombay are half constructed, half destroyed, constantly shifting, never quite fixed, in a very similar way to which this space, that now the physical exists, but you know, air and sun and everything is sort of changing the shape of that physical ruin constantly. So yeah, for me, in terms of formal concerns, there were a lot of very exciting things to take forward in my own head, but also I thought they were talking to each other in interesting ways.
Yeah, I think it was really interesting, because I think the architecture, I mean, what is interesting is that it's about migration, but what was interesting about the two films is that they have an architectural grade, you know, there's the city, and the issue of ruins and architecture, grades and lives. And I think in terms of thinking these two massive phenomena happening side by side, at close proximity, but looking so different here. But what really, I mean, one kind of takes away from an experience like this is to ask certain questions about, well, I mean, for me, what is interesting about YUMEN is the fact of things coming in, which are then evoked through the sounds and things like that, memories of sounds, presences, and all that, and emptying out. But also the present of the film, which is also filling in by the art space into a space of, you know, one has to also locate it within the production of the film as another kind of filling in by a certain cultural framework within which it is possible to make a film like this, which is interesting because you are thinking, okay, you know, I mean, so here there is a possibility of the ruin being reincarnated in some Greek tragedy, archaeology. You know, this is something that goes back to the early 70s, where voices speaking in front of civilizational ruins and asking questions of what happened in history, which is a very old form. The fact that it is possible, and then we are thinking that what is the relationship between movement of bodies? So when YUMEN was there, one could imagine a Bidesia kind of film where there would have been, you know, that kind of culture, folk or whatever, you know, music and things like that. And the fact that both are so, you know, they seem to say that, okay, migrant lives is about music, you know, that's the way in which they survive, and that's running through. And then you ask the question that why is it possible in the case of India? Like, is there an emptying out ever in that sense? You know, in the sense in which it can happen in China. And is there a relationship between governance, civilizational principles, or, you know, which has that cycle where things can fill in, empty out, and then something else, a modernist artistic regime can come in or not, which becomes, I think, some of the things that we have to think through all the time, because we are saying, why aren't certain things possible in India? You know? And why are certain things possible in China? Or the histories look very similar in terms of cultural production, in terms of filmic form, for example. Like, you know, why would a film like this not be possible for a very similar context? Those are the kind of things that we take back. But at the end, then you kind of stop that line of thinking and say, well, in India, actually, there is an attempt now to go into some kind of governmentality or a certain kind of modernist regime which wants to, you know, streamline the mess, you know, and this battle that Surabhi's film shows is some kind of an absurd battle that goes on between planners and their vision of a well-maintained city, and you know, and how, and yet it is consistently breaking down. But then you are wondering whether we are in India on the threshold of something very similar to China, where, you know, over time, you know, certain things like this will happen. At the moment, it seems impossible. But that's why I think that although things look very different on the surface, at this conjuncture in time, it seems that there might be, you know, and YUMEN might be showing, you know, watching a film like this about China, sometimes tells you that, oh, this might be the future that you're looking at in a certain way. If, you know, what the governance has on paper were to come through, then something very similar like that might happen very soon. And then, so it's like, you know, these are the kind of things that, you know, you think about when you have this kind of comparative framework. Because again, in your paper, you know, very similar stories. But then again, the differences are very, as we're saying, the structures of differences need to be looked at. And it would be interesting to see how, you know, such, and I think that's the importance of doing such exercises, I think, to make us think through apparent vast differences and then say, wait, no, maybe, you know, there are certain other things happening which are, so that would be my
yeah, I guess I would just say something about the themes of the two films, which to me, you know, we talked about the similarities, cinematography in filming and that kind of thing, but thematically I found the two films very, very different. I mean, obviously one is about migration into a city, one is about migration out of a city, but beyond that, in the Mumbai film, I found that it was largely focusing on a group of people who have migrated there, but still retain very strong connections with the place that they're from, area of North India, particularly linguistic connections. They keep stressing Bhojpuri, the importance of language and how that is expressed through song as a way of preserving and remaining attached to their own native place culture. Whereas by contrast in YUMEN, I think we're looking at something completely different. I mean, that's a city which is empty. And it's not empty because, you know, in the kinds of rural-urban migration that we might see all across China, there might be empty villages because there's a huge wave of economic migration out of villages towards the cities. That is absolutely not what has happened in the YUMEN case. That was a city that was artificially built around resource excavation oil in the 1950s, I believe, in a very inhospitable terrain where there wasn't really anything else to support a city. I mean, I think I've heard it referred to as the city that should never have been built. So that there isn't a rich sort of culture of that area. That area was barren until the city was built around the oil field in the 1950s. Then when the oil ran out, people were transferred to oil fields elsewhere in China, in Xinjiang, and obviously that led to the collapse of the economy of the YUMEN region. And I think, if I remember this correctly, I think that the city government and what was left of the city was sort of moved to YUMEN town, I don't know, 100 kilometers or so away, leaving just this shell of a city, as we saw in the film. So I think, you know, there are not migrants from YUMEN who have this kind of rich cultural history and native place association that we see in the case of the migrants into Bombay. That's really a place where people were moved in under the planned economy in China and have now been left to their own devices to move themselves out in a sense, the failure of the planned economy, the failure of it to plan for the eventuality of the resources running out. So I think there's a very great contrast in themes between the two, and they make a very good pair, actually, for that reason. You know, we see the processes of filling up and emptying out. I guess it's the two sides of migration. Thank you.
What Surabhi mentioned about the sort of sonic elements, I actually, when I saw your film initially in Oxford, it's one of the things I immediately picked up on that they shared, was this kind of space making, like you're saying, for us, and again, the dance, and my feeling is it's in the film YUMEN, it's actually Ruotao who's doing these paintings, you know, he's got that mask on, he's doing all these paintings, and you know, he's got the book out, and he's painting all the people who aren't there, and there's this sense in which he's creating the crowd, and creating these people and getting them back again, and that's, for me, it's really a study in loneliness, and it does make me wonder about, you know, even if we accept the fact that, you know, the villages that are left behind in UP or Bihar are not desolate in that way, what is the emotional effect? You know, the loneliness that they talk about in the music. They talk about this loneliness, and in YUMEN, it's kind of taken to this extreme level where it's making people a little bit crazy, actually. So, and the scenes where they're sort of rolling along, you just kind of expect it to stop, and it doesn't stop, and it's just building after building after building of emptiness. So, anyway, does anybody have anything more to say, or shall we see if anybody's got any comments? Any questions for Surabhi?
Congratulations. Actually, the two things are the two movies are very interesting. Very amazing. One reality is also there. But about this Surabhi film, very legislative population migration was there. It is a living organism which you can see. They are also the spirituality. It is a governing. Ma Krupa said that within the contemporary period of secular time also, a spirituality is the guiding and governing is there. And where is the drinkable water is there. But where is in China, there is no drinkable water is available or not. It is clearly visible when the girl is putting fruits and rotis before it. But she is not putting water. That reality being your social scientist, whether you have observed or not, she put two fruits and rotis over these things. In the reality, there is no water is not available. For us, it is okay, distillery water is there. So, this comment I wanted from your side.
It's not a question, it's a comment. I don't know how much I agree with your assessment of the comparative use of showing two films like this in a sociological way. Because to me it seems that, other than the fact that both the films are looking at the idea of migration, in a very thematic, straightforward thematic way, it's actually, to me, it was very interesting to watch the two together, but for completely other reasons. And this was to kind of, what struck me was the way bodies are inhabiting space in both the films. And it was some kind of sense of madness that, overcomes the people in both the films in a very different context. So even in Bidesia, you kind of, there's a sense of frenzy, and there are some scenes towards the end after the mobile Devi song. So this combination of spirituality and eroticism, which is there in both the films, I thought in strange ways. So I think, what's interesting is about how the two filmmakers have kind of played around with the idea of making space, of how people make a place, But I don't know, I didn't attend a conference, so I don't really know what the objective is in terms of the comparative framework, but it'd be interesting to hear a little bit about it as to, why would you choose two films that have a common theme, but which seem to be doing something similar, but not in terms of the theme of migration. Because that's an obvious thing that, if somebody's leaving a place, they're going to go somewhere else. So there is a place that is filling up and there's a place that's emptying out. And I was thinking of a film called Rihai by Aruna Raje, which is a fiction film which, when somebody was talking about the psychological impact of the people who get, on the people who get left behind, which is what that film kind of looks at, and the different social relations that start forming and all of that. So yeah, because I teach in the cinema studies department, so I'm trying to understand how this works from a very different perspective of why you would put these two films together.
Well, the first film that I got hold of was YUMEN. The object of the entire conference is to look at comparative paradigms for studying China and India together, and it's a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary conference to talk about methodology for doing that. So that's why I kind of had a little preamble about methodology, and certainly my thoughts about that, this translational aspect of comparative study are not absolute. There's some thoughts that I've been considering recently that I wanted to get other people's opinion on. I got YUMEN first, and because there are so few films, or actually I don't even know of one, that makes a comparison within its framework between China and India. Particularly today, we had the session was about internal migration this morning in various ways: education, well-being, portrayal of internal migrants, this sort of thing. So a few different things. So I got hold of YUMEN, and then I was trying to think about getting something from an Indian perspective on the experience of migration. So yes, on a purely thematic level, I was looking for something that would speak to that question about the social effects of migration. And then I happened to have seen Surabhi's film in Oxford. She came over to the university and was showing it there. And like I said, there was this feeling that, especially the sonic elements, with the description of alienation and of loneliness, combined with the intense economic activity, with the absolute contrast of the full nature and the loud nature, and then this quiet, empty space. I thought it would be interesting and provoke some thought. And I think that you're absolutely right to pick out, different other elements. The principle that we were discussing this morning in part was that sometimes if you take certain sets of data, you find again and again, India's lagging China, or you look at it another way and then you say, well, there's no point in doing this comparison at all because everything is different. But for myself, I think that there are a series of similarities and this pattern of like and unlike that's worth exploring, particularly in social problems and social answers, social effects of rapid economic and social change. So this was the basic premise for looking for films for this. And I was particularly interested also because they both have a documentary element, but then also have elements that are maybe not strictly documentary in style. So there was a stylistic pairing, and there was a thematic pairing, and then there were some kind of motifs that I felt ran through, and I just thought that they would provoke some interesting conversation, and the filmmakers were willing to give it to me. That's the other part, for free.
That's important.
Sorry?
That's so important.
Yeah, it is. Because you didn't have to pay for a ticket, so, Yeah, so that's it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Oh,
Yeah. This kind of an exercise, the next question, after we can go on discussing these two films, particularly in terms of what they're doing at this present moment, what their logics are. But, and again, I mean, as Rashmi made a point, we have, I mean, I am asking this question from being in a kind of pedagogical context, which relates to film. The obvious question is, how do we take this forward, more comparative, but not just through documentary films, but through a series of other comparative frameworks. You gave us an example in the morning by comparing two films, which looked quite, the comparison seemed to be absolutely fine, because it seems, you're comparing, as opposed to this situation, you're comparing to very similar generic films, because, and then they show popular cinema comes in. And so therefore there are various levels at which the entire media spectrum, both India and China, can be scanned for what is being done on the logic of migration. So at this level maybe things are very different, but again, at the level in which you were talking about these two films, which are popular films, the comparisons might seem more apt. And then at the level of, say, just comparing the kind of media material that Surabhi is dealing with, maybe China doesn't have that kind of material in the sense of Bhojpuri production of discourse about migration in an eroticized, and an industrial form of new media material that is there. There, the same new media material that is used for expressing completely different desires, completely different kind of logics. So it would be interesting to, to take the next step forward to actually, respond to certain questions that this kind of an exercise may raise, to have a more comprehensive kind of comparative framework. It's exactly where your issue of data sets, to make the data set more complex and more variegated.
Anybody else? Okay, so I guess we're finished now. Everybody can go and have high tea. And then there'll be, and I'm glad actually we're finishing just even actually a tiny bit early, which is super awesome. Because the people who are coming in for the concert will set up and they will like me a lot more when they've got some more time. But yeah, thank you all for coming very much, and obviously Tamish is here, so you can, if she's willing, ask her things. And we're all here in case you want to ask us anything, but we're not as talented, so we're not as interesting. Thanks a lot, and tomorrow we have a full day for the conference of papers, academic papers all day, no films tomorrow, but there will be very, very good papers, and just dealing with primarily policy questions, from everything from agriculture to privacy and technology, and then we will have a business leader who's been involved with defense technology giving the final keynote tomorrow afternoon. So yeah, keep a lookout for the posters, and you can ask me anything about that. Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you.